And I just want to say welcome back to Eric Phelps, Pastor Eric, for coming back with...
Pleasure to be with you, Sean, and your listeners.
So yeah, I just wanted to have an opportunity to touch base with you. A lot of things are going on in our society here in America, which are just incredibly moving really fast. And you can see that in many ways, the capacity for the military government to use its resources is really being displayed now. I can remember when the Border Patrol wasn't even allowed to even operate. They were just more like border chaperones. So they would just chaperone the invasion from the south or maybe from the north. And they didn't have any kind of enforcement ability at all. Now we're in a totally different world where you can see that the ICE agents are being used in a way that, for better or for worse, is infuriating a segment of the population who I think of as traitors. I mean, these individuals who are going to, and it's understood. I mean, we live in a world where Alex Jones once was decrying the military, the deep state, and the plan for putting people in FEMA camps and martial law. And now we're in a world where Alex Jones, in many ways, is kind of refereeing and kind of cheerleading it on. So
Brian Kilmeade talked about rounding up all the people on the street and put them in camps, terminating them. That's what Brian Kilmeade called for on Fox News
recently.
Oh yeah,
I'll have to look that up.
That Roman Catholic Brian Kilmeade. That's what he said.
One of Fox News' biggest names is now apologizing after he made a shocking comment about killing homeless people. Brian Kilmeade and the other hosts of Fox and Friends were talking on Wednesday about the murder of 23-year-old Irina Zarutska in North Carolina and how to stop those kinds of crimes when he said this.
Either you take the resources that we're going to give you or you decide that you're going to be locked up in jail. That's the way it has to be now.
Or involuntary lethal injection or something. Just kill them.
Yep. So, it's, as you said, it's morphing into a gradual martial law. But as I said previously, Biden and Trump worked together. Biden was the greatest friend Trump could ever have with all the terrible things he did, and letting those millions of alien, savage invaders coming into this country, committing crimes everywhere. That is exactly what the Jesuits wanted, so that Trump could be justified in rounding them up with ICE, which they need to be rounded up. But they're going to go to every city, and it's not going to stop. So they took the criminal activities of Joe Biden, which really started with Ronald Reagan. When Ronald Reagan in the 1980s gave amnesty to all the illegals that came in here. So it's been a policy of both the Republicans and the Democrats, because they're both run by the Jesuits, to make this country less white, as Charlie Kirk rightly said, and to drive the white people, as I've always said, into the new right out of desperation. And this alien Hispanic Roman Catholic invasion has really done the trick, in conjunction with bringing in many, many hundreds of thousands of blacks in Africa into this country also. So they're creating the historic white new right, and that looks like the only solution to the problem to the average unsaved or uninformed white man.
Yeah, I understand. I understand what you're saying completely. I think we've been listening. A certain subset of Americans, particularly, have been listening to you for a long time, and have been, as you have, been laying out for us tomorrow's news today, and that's really what's been going on this entire time. So it's interesting that in so many ways, you have kind of like a shadow ban, like there's kind of like a soft kind of a hush over, your broadcasts that you've been doing for quite some time. And as it turns out, as we move forward, I'm starting to get this creeping feeling, because once a long time ago, and we'd have to go back to the records, and someone should really go and put together your information and compile it in a way that we could really look at this clearly. But I remember when you were talking about AOC becoming the president. And now I have a tear. At that time I laughed when you said that, because it was ridiculous. But now I have this sneaking fear of that. So can you talk to me about what your perspective is on that?
Well, they'll make her president or somebody like her, like this Muslim, to be the mayor in New York City. Remember, the Jesuits have ruled New York City since no later than 1850, according to Chineke in his work, 50 Years in the Church of Rome. So why would the Jesuits ruling New York City put this Mondami, whatever his name is, as the mayor of New York?
Momskrani. But yeah, go ahead.
He was doing it for the purpose of further destroying the infrastructure of New York City by making $30 an hour minimum wage. That will destroy the small to middle class businessmen. And then he's also calling for a few other radical socialist communist things to further destroy the middle class in New York, but it's going to drive out the Jews. Their target is to get rid of the Jews out of New York City, to drive them to Israel over the Gaza agitation that the world is calling now a genocide, and it is not a genocide. Every Gazan, every Muslim that's died in Gaza, because there's no such thing as a Palestinian, they have no history, nothing. All of them that have died there have been killed at the hands of Hamas, because they're the ones that started it. They shed first blood. Remembering, of course, that the leader of Hamas in Doha, in Qatar, and Netanyahu in Israel worked together to facilitate this. And that's another reason the Jesuits killed Charlie Kirk, is because he came out with the question, was there a stand down order in Israel? And of course there was. So they're going to, and Trump's going to, because on a recent broadcast, I said Trump, J.D. Vance, Kash Patel, John Bongino, as much as I like him, the Attorney General Pam Bondi, the head of the intelligence community, 17 intelligence communities, Tulsi Gabbard, they're all in on it. They all work together. But the one that's telling Trump what to do is the Archbishop of New York City, not the Mossad, not Israel. And the one telling Netanyahu what to do is the Latin Patriarch of Jerusalem, who's a member of the Knights of the Equestrian Order, a Knight of Malta. He's the most powerful man in the Middle East. Nobody's talking about the papal connections right here, and that's the real source of the problem. You have Alex Jones blaming the left. You have Candace Owens, the black Roman Catholic, with her white husband, blaming Israel. It's exactly what the CIA wants to do. The Pope and the CIA blame Israel, blame the left, but never, ever blame the Jesuit-controlled papacy.
Yeah, that's an interesting point. I just noticed that the Jesuits don't come out often to kind of show any cards that they might have at their chest. They did come out recently to support BLM in a really public and kind of nonchalant, casual way. But now I see that those individuals are out in force with the Tridentine, like the Latin Mass, and they're going up to the ICE agents and the ICE locations with their full regalia, trying to like say they want to come in and present like a Roman Catholic Mass to the poor enslaved individuals inside. So you can see that they're really like showing their hand. They're really showing how, and also Pope Leo is doing the same thing. He's on Twitter. I don't know if you've noticed, but they're starting to like push hard, and it becomes this kind of like perennial battle that's like America versus the Roman papacy, and it's always been that way, I think.
Oh, sure, but see, the average American doesn't know that. The average American thinks it's just the left or the communists or whatever, and they have no idea. The Roman papacy is a military sovereign state, declaring war on all the nations of the world to bring them under the political or temporal power of the Pope. And to do that, the Jesuits used their combined intelligence communities of the world to subjugate all the peoples of the nations of the world. And the biggest player in bringing this about is the Pope's Holy Roman 14th Amendment, corporate fascist, socialist, communist American empire. that was started in 1868 when they proclaimed the 14th Amendment was ratified, and it never was. And then they gave it a military government on March 9th, 1933 with FDR, overseen by Jesuit Edmund Walsh. So you have this empire with an emergency war powers military government now getting ready to morph into martial law. And martial law is completely permitted under Proclamation 2040 of March 9th, 1933, and the garrisoning of forces abroad. Without that Proclamation 2040 that confirms and approves all the other proclamations, there could be no garrisoning of any troops abroad, and there could be no martial law. And it's all in that proclamation and the Emergency Banking Relief Act that approved and confirmed it. One statute keeps this whole system in place. So that's where they're going, and now it's blame the Jew. And I'm putting together a broadcast with to show that AIPAC, that bribes American congressmen to give money to the Pope's government ruling Israel, that AIPAC is run by the Council on Foreign Relations. And the Council on Foreign Relations was started in 1921 after World War I. Its sister organization was the Royal Institute for International Affairs, started in London in 1919, and that they too would work together to further the Pope's temporal power with their crusades around the world. So the CFR oversees AIPAC, and the Archbishop of New York City oversees the CFR, and the Pope oversees the Archbishop of New York City, as that Archbishop is overseen by the Jesuits of Fordham. That's all there is to this. So all these people blaming AIPAC, the Jews. Listen, the Jews involved in this are papal Hofjuden, as Sherman Skolnick used to call them. They're the papal court Jews doing the bidding of the Pope. Whether it's Bloomberg or Kissinger or you name it, they're all Masonic B'nai B'rith Jews busy working for the papacy and betraying their own racial Hebrew, Jewish, Israelitish people, which are not Khazars. They're not the 13th tribe, as advocated by Kessler in his book, The 13th Tribe. They are actual racial Hebrew, Jewish Israelites of the 12 tribes living in Israel. So, unless that groundwork is understood, there's going to be all sorts of distractions and lies, and people are going to get madder and more agitated. But they need to read true history and the Reformation English Bible to get an understanding.
Yeah, it's interesting. You brought up this point about the Palestinians, and I'd like to talk about the history about it. If you go back and look at the root of this invention of the Palestinian, or this kind of idea of a Palestinian nation, it kind of comes into play with the invention of the United Nations, who would start to use this word Palestine. And the history of the word Palestine comes from the Roman Empire, who burned Jerusalem in 70 AD. I think it was General Titus, who ultimately would become emperor afterwards. So the word Palestina, they decided after they burned Jerusalem and destroyed this central city of Israel, that they would rename the region Palestina after their ancient enemies, the Philistines. So
that's right. And the emperor that did this now was Hadrian in about 135. Titus paved the way, but Hadrian is the one who did this, and then plowed up the Temple Mount, plowed up the whole area as was prophesied he would do. So that's right. This is all Rome. This whole idea of Palestinian is a Roman invention. Palestinian, the Yasser Arafat was the one to create the PLO in 1964, aided by the USSR that the Jesuits ruled. And so it's a non-people. It's like the Romulans of Star Trek or the Klingons. They don't exist. They have no history. They're just Arab Muslims used as a wild card by the Arab nations, as well as the Pope's government of Israel, the revived Latin Kingdom of Jerusalem, to keep everything in agitation till the final Pope of Rome comes to power, who will then execute the covenant of Daniel 9:27 and bring a false peace to the region, to Jerusalem and Israel for 3.5 years. Until that time, there will never be a deal. The agitation will continue, no matter what Trump says he's going to do. This is his agreement. It's nothing more that was tested in Oslo, and it never never worked there, and it's not going to work now. The agitation must work continually for the benefit of the final Pope of Rome. So that's why the papacy is behind the quote-unquote Palestinians to continue this agitation around the world against the Jews, so that the people of the nations not reading the Bible, being paganized for the last 100 years, will then blame the Jew, and the Jew will be driven out of their nations to Israel, and the Jews that are not driven out will be ultimately rounded up and sent to concentration camps by the new right that will arise in Europe and will arise here. As Martin Lee said in his book, The Beast Reawakens. And as Betty said in her book,
Betty Claremont, I think.
Yeah, Betty Lamont said, establishing Christian nationalism in America. That's exactly what they've done here. And then Pete Hegseth is the classic illustration of this. Knight of the Equestrian Order, got the cross of the Equestrian Order tattooed on his left breast. I mean, the guy's a crusader. He puts up the Lord's Prayer in the midst of all these American weapons of war, like he's a crusader, and he is. And that's why they renamed it from the Department of Defense to the Department of War, because they're going to war for the Pope.
Yeah, it's interesting when I look at, I know that we talked about Alex Jones before. He's being positioned there to really be kind of a spokesman for this new right. And I noticed that they were coming out with some gear, which is like Crusader gear. So it's like a new holy war.
Is that right? Yeah.
And they have all the emblems and all the Templar crosses and everything as their motif.
Yeah.
I noticed that Chase Geyser, too, when I did a little research with him, he apparently admits openly on the show that he's a 32nd degree Freemason, and he does it several times. It's one of the other InfoWars guys over there, and it just becomes kind of clear to me that in the background there that they're papal knights that are really kind of pushing up on this, on the programming there.
They're Templars. All the high-level Freemasons are, in fact, Knights Templars. And these Knights Templars run by the Jesuit order. And then you have the Knights of Malta, the Knights of the Constantinian Order, Knights of St. Gregory, which is Rupert Murdoch as one of them, Knight of the Equestrian Order of the Holy Sepulchre. That's another thing you want to keep your eye on. They're going to destroy these mosques in this coming war in the Middle East to pave the way for the Third Temple, but they're also going to destroy the Sepulchre, the Church of the Holy Sepulchre too, which is the most sacred site of the Roman papacy. It's guarded by the equestrians. So when those two edifices, or actually the three edifices, two on the Temple Mount, one right nearby at the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, when they get destroyed, it'll be absolute crusading war. Yeah.
It's interesting when you mentioned Mamdani too, which I'll tie in here, because it seems like he is like the perfect kind of fusion between Islam and Marxism, which has been talked about for quite some time. And now the full kind of like weight of that is kind of going to, and we can see that there's a huge Muslim influence in Minnesota as well. But you can see that this pressure that when you talk about the destruction of the mosque there, that will kind of the outrage that's going to come out. So I think that we have like pre-positioned now this kind of furious military phalanx within the United States that's kind of positioned to react to this situation that you're calling for here. And,
right. They'll destroy both mosques. It's called the Mosque of Omar or the Dome of the Rock. And then the other one is the Al-Aqsa Mosque. Both of those mosques are on the Temple Mount. And there's an author that came out and said that these don't have to be removed for the Third Temple to be built. And I beg to differ from him. They have to go. And they will be gone. And the Jesuits put out a movie called The Order many years ago that was starring, quote-unquote, Claude Van Damme. And in that movie, it shows the Knights Templars plotting to blow up the Dome of the Rock. Something that all the listeners should take a look at. So they're going to do that, but they're also going to get the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, and then that will be absolute war. And they're going to blame all of this. They're going to blame it on the American military. You see, that's why they had to get Trump protected with not releasing the entire Epstein files. And of course, the high Democrats don't want them released either. But they don't want them released because it will show that he went to Epstein Island, that he was a part of this, and therefore he could not be the Pope's crusader. Therefore, they had to save his position as being crusader that they prepared him for all these years. And that's why the Epstein files are not being released. And Kirk wanted them released also. So now that's the second count against him. He had no idea that it's going to destroy Trump, that he campaigned for and helped to make him president. And he had no idea that when he started calling for the answering the question, did the government of Israel tell the IDF to stand down for 7 hours until all the raping, pillaging, and plundering and savage murder could take place? And yeah, that's right, they did stand down. And if that would have been known, that's the end of Netanyahu's government. So those two things right there would end the Trump administration and the Netanyahu administration. And so for that, they shot Charlie Kirk in the back of in the neck with a .38 revolver. And I show him, they call him the white shirt shooter there when he shot him. And as soon as he brings the gun up and he recoils, that's when Kirk goes back. I have it on my website, 24/7 World Radio. So they killed him. There was at least 8 or 10 people involved in it at the time they shot and killed him, and then got rid of all the evidence when they took him away. We never seen a coroner, never seen anything. They did this very cleverly, and then Trump gives the Turning Point USA to the wife, Erica, who was involved in it also. That's where Candace Owens is correct. She was involved in it, and she said, I know everything. So they're going to brush this under the table. They're going to brush the Epstein files under the table because they're going to use their great crusader, Donald Trump, to have this crusade. And Bibi Netanyahu is going to be a part of it because he, in conjunction with the high Arab leaders, will facilitate the destruction of those mosques in the Temple Mount for the building of the Third Hebrew Temple, which has already been cut. It's already ready to be built. They just need to get rid of those mosques.
Another thing that's kind of on the agenda here that you've talked about in the past many times, and so many of these things are starting to move forward, just kind of as the temperature, the climate in the United States is kind of becoming this thing that you predicted. And I noticed that you talked about the possibility, and this is just theoretical, of that there would suddenly be a catastrophic destruction of the Capitol building in the United States, God forbid, and that even that there was maybe even the possibility, kind of as you look in your crystal ball, as it were, to kind of like divine this picture, but the possibility that ultimately Detroit could end up being nuked. I wonder to myself, first, how you would kind of get to that, which you've talked about it before, but how you could reach those conclusions, and how do you see the possibility of that now? Because it seems like in this chart of time, this kind of like map that you lay out, it needs to happen before we get to this stage where they want to put up the temple tomorrow, but all these series of things need to happen first, it seems.
Right, they have to have military in all the major cities where you have this monstrous black on black and black on white crime. Remember, the black population ain't no 13%. It's more like 25 to 30%. And they commit 60 to 70% of all the violent crimes. And this is exactly what the Jesuits want, because their Freemasons in the courts release them after they commit all their violent crimes. Kirk was right. He said black men, these blacks, kill 600 white women a year. I said that they kill 10 white people a day and they rape 100 white women a day in this country on average. So that's just what the Jesuits want. More bastardization of the white race, the destruction of it, because after all, the Lord used Protestant Reformation of white men to bring about the Reformation. So they got to go. There can be no white Protestant nations anymore, and there aren't any. They're gone. And so now with that, we're going to have to foment more anti-white fury, anti-white propaganda. So we have all the big boys, the Pope's white power structure, giving all this aid and academic things to all the blacks to give them supremacy. So what we have now in this country is black supremacy. Joy Reid was right, that black, wicked, racist wench, when she said, we have the culture now. She was right. But it was made possible by the white power structure working for the Pope using certain upfront Jews. So this is driving the white men to desperation and rage against the Jews because they're going to blame the Jews for all of this. But you're absolutely correct. There has to be a major demolition of some national monument. I thought maybe it might have been the Statue of Liberty for a while because, Lee Iacocca and one other, I believe it was Gerald Ford, worked in the and the revamping of the Statue of Liberty, where they planted all their explosives during the administration, I think, of Ronald Reagan. So, but it's going to be more than that. They're going to decimate the Capitol building, as they told us in Soul Survivor with Kiefer Sutherland, and other movies like Live Free or Die Hard with Bruce Willis. Remember, they always tell us what they're going to do in their movies, because they run Hollywood. Jews don't run Hollywood. The Jesuits run it and use certain upfront Jews to make it look like the Jews run it. So they tell us what they're doing. So there's going to be something like that. And the Capitol is going, no doubt, to Denver, Colorado, and Colorado Springs, a great underground facility there. They're going to go into the mountain. And what's that called? Anyway.
In Denver?
Huge,
okay, gotcha.
What's that?
You will look it up, but yeah, it's somewhere in Denver there. Yeah, gotcha. Yeah. I know there's there has been talked about for quite some time under the airport there. I think that they have underground tunnel works.
Yes. Very, very extensive. Cheyenne Mountain.
Right.
The Cheyenne Mountain will be the key place of all military operations when the Pentagon is really not the key place anymore. They've moved everything to Denver, Colorado Springs, in preparation for the destruction of the Capitol building, so they can make a formal move out there when it's already been done. And then that's where they will conduct their two-front war. There will be a war in the Far East with China and other Asian nations that are joining China, and there will be a war in the Middle East. So we will have a two-front war that will have to be fought, and ultimately our military will be betrayed by the Joint Chiefs of Staff, just as the German army was betrayed in the East and betrayed in the West. To the end, though, we'll lose, and we're going to have our Sino-Soviet Muslim invasion, which I've talked about, as you know. But this is what they're planning on. And when they come here, they're going to show you what real racism is about. Because the Chinese and the Koreans and the Japanese hate the American black man, and they're going to kill every one of them they can find, because they remember how those black GIs were raping their women when they were stationed in China and Okinawa and Japan. They remember it all. So do the Germans. And so it's going to be the end of the black man in North America when these invaders come here. And so these blacks need to wake up and realize the best friends they ever had were white people that were Protestant, Calvinistic, Baptist, and Bible believing, because we're getting killed out of the land. And the Roman Catholics have taken over everything with their new right. And you have a Catholic administration, a Catholic Supreme Court. And it's going to be the death knell for them as well as the Jews, because the Jews are going to be either killed out of here or the minority driven to Israel. So that's what they have planned. Yeah.
Yeah, the last time I've heard you discuss this before, but a similar kind of, I would want to say, prediction that you made was that the individuals here who were illegally were in danger, that they were not safe here in North America, and they had better get home quickly before it's too late.
That's what I tell them.
Yep.
So I tell them, I says, you need to get out of here, because they're going to kill you. They're going to take you on trains to the camps. And because of all the crimes that these alien Hispanic invaders have committed, it's all going to be justified. So you need to get out of here, and you need to get out now. And you know what? I have some friends in Texas, and they were saying, Eric, for some reason they want to go back. I said, they better go back. But you see, Mexico doesn't want it, because there were all the low population of Mexico that came in here in the first place, facilitated by the president of Mexico. So they don't want them. So the alien invaders are kind of going to be now like the Palestinians. They're not wanted back in the nations they came from, and they're not wanted here, this wild card. And the Jesuits love these wild cards because it justifies absolutism and military dictatorships.
Yeah, I noticed this particular recipe that you've been discussing that has been hitting America regarding this the driving of criminal populations from other lands into America has been something that they've been doing on an international scale. So it's not just America who's being subjected to these kind of destructive policies, but it's also Ireland and Sweden and Germany. Italy even has just an overrun of impoverished, unwanted elements from Africa or wherever, and they're just busting them and shipping them in. And so, and you can see that in many ways, London has been turned into Londonistan, And now that we have this awakening of the social media that can show images 24 hours a day, and we can kind of see what has been underway for decades now, just like it is in Michigan, in Dearborn, or am I saying that right?
That's right, Dearborn, Michigan, with a Shia. Mm-hmm.
Well, now it's Londonist Dearborn, right? It's becoming transformed in the same way, and it's the same policies that are underway throughout the world. So this is kind of this conflagration is like a third world war that's expected to be an international conflagration, not just here.
Well, remember, the only ones that can orchestrate this are the Jesuits in control of the governments and thus in control of the intelligence communities. MI5 and MI6 have facilitated all of this with the traitorous British leaders. But the question is it going to stay there? Is Europe going to become Muslim? And I say absolutely not. The Pope will never allow Europe to become Muslim. So therefore, why is he behind this and his Jesuits? To drive the white Europeans together into the new right, just as Martin Lee said they would be. And when that goes on, you're going to have a lot of raging white people in France, England, Netherlands, Finland, and when their rage turns against these alien occupants that are savages to them, and these people have been disarmed deliberately, so they have to put up with it until they cry out to the government to deliver them, then you're going to see a return. They're going to be exterminated with the concentration camps, and then you're going to have a united Europe. So you have to unite Europe with a common enemy. Well, it's the Muslims and the blacks that they brought into Europe with their robbing, raping, pillaging, and destroying the white peoples. So that will ultimately happen. And this also is a way that the Jesuits have removed a pressure of all these Arabs on the revived Latin kingdom of Jerusalem, because they've been driven into Europe and America only to be destroyed in the future. And so that gives a break for Israel so that they don't have as many Arabs to fight.
It seems like this kind of policy on the ground is being coupled with, intellectual programs and academia and policy level government decretals where they're basically announcing that, or it's been kind of like a political shift within society for quite some time that, we are very inviting. We understand other people's ethnicity is the same as ours. We're very pacified. We have this kind of the DEI. We want diversity. We want to see all these different people groups mingling together to be a peaceful society, and we're accepting. We're not racist. We're not racist. We're accepting of other people groups, and this is coupled with the forced.
That's all the bait. That's all bait. They know that races don't mix. That's why Thomas Jefferson, the brilliant man of laws and letters and knowing how right government works, he said both races equally free, that's blacks and whites, both races equally free cannot live under the same government. And you can find that quotation in a book called Race and Reason, written by Carlton Putnam in 1961. And Carlton Putnam was the founder of Delta Airlines. So this whole beating the dead horse of forcefully race mixing peoples never works. You're mixing water with oil. It can't work because the Lord created the different races to keep mankind separate. And the devil wants to combine them for his purpose of justifying absolutism, because you can only rule a miscegenated people with a military dictator. That's why they had all the miscegenation in Rome. It furthered the power of the emperor. So it is here.
Yeah, it's interesting that this particular contrast between different ethnicities and different people groups is particularly vivid here in America, because we have like this distinct different like pigment in our skin. This melanin content in our skin gives us these different complexions, so it's very vivid. But the same principle is true when you go to other places in the world where it's not patently clear based on your skin color. So if you're in Asia and you have people who are Chinese and people who are Korean, they have very distinct cultures and languages that keep them, in their histories and their particular characteristics very, very separate. And it's not about necessarily, you see what I'm saying? And I look at the wars that have occurred there, and the people there remember for a long time, how their people were treated by these other countries, whether it's in Korea or between Japan and China, for instance, and the connections there between individuals who, in your words, were raped. And these are not very significant physical differences in appearance, but the trauma and the difference between the culture and the difference between the families there are so drastic that it's hard to see how they could be fitted together and made to work in the way that these guys are trying to do. It's the same thing. Different people have different cultures and customs, and they're different, and it can't be changed. It can't be altered, even if you force them to live together in a tenement.
Well, remember, the Asians don't race mix. The Chinese don't marry the Japanese don't marry the Koreans don't marry the Laotians. They do not race mix. They keep separate with their own cultures and languages. So, are they hateful racists? Of course not. They're preserving their race, language, and culture with geographical borders. So they don't do that. So the Jesuits don't push that, but what they do push is communism. Communism on the Asian nations.
That's right. It's another word from our great sponsor, Colossus Hobbies and Gifts. And you can find them at colossushobbies.com. A growing online emporium, pro-American, pro-family, and pro-Trump 2028. ColossusHobbies.com is Fun Time Incorporated, the most awesome joy emporium of gifts, hobbies, and games, toys, costumes, and sports gear anywhere online. Playtime, creation, and excitement for all ages. Every balloon, robot, yard bubble, hula hoop, laser gun, jump rope, camping tent, and video games, all at ColossusHobbies.com. It's all about joy and laughter and playtime amusement at ColossusHobbies.com. Need good gift ideas or accoutrements for your favorite hobby? ColossusHobbies.com. Drones, sports gear, board games, party supplies, educational projects, STEM learning, and Play-Doh and Play Slime. Sunglasses, balls, and G.I. Joes, all at ColossusHobbies.com. PlayStation 5 and games. Colossus Hobbies and Gifts is growing and adding new gift ideas and surprises every day. As you can possibly imagine, we have all this various camping supplies and card games, magic tricks, and seasonal gifts, unique gift ideas for all ages, all kinds of puzzles and beads, and many indescribable delights and joys, all at ColossusHobbies.com. Come support us here at Real American View and check out ColossusHobbies.com.
And one more thing, what makes the difference in us is not just skin color, not just melon. That is a communist propaganda. People are different by virtue of their cranial capacities, their skin color, the texture of their hair, the body size. All of these things are racial differences. And therefore, the different races produce different cultures. Some cultures are higher, some cultures are lower. But it's absolutely in the genes of those people that are making those cultures. Show me a culture in Africa that's like the Netherlands. There isn't one. Show me any auto manufacturer in Africa. There isn't one. Show me a refrigeration company in Africa. There aren't any. Only advances in Africa came by white men in Rhodesia and South Africa. And any other, it's not going to be advanced because the blacks don't invent anything. They've only been out of the bush for 700 years. And so as a result, whenever they're forced inequality upon white peoples, the white culture suffers. And that's obvious here and in any white culture. But that's the design of the Jesuit order to weaken the white nations that brought about the Protestant Reformation and set back the temporal power of the Pope and gave the Bible in the hands of the common man to nearly everybody in their own language. That was done by white men who believe the Bible. So it's a race war. They've been waging a race war against us white men who read the Bible, Protestants and Baptists, for the last 200 years. Having wars will kill each other. We'll have World War I, so the English Protestants will kill the German Protestants. Great. And there's a book out on that called The Holy War. recently released, or maybe a couple of years ago it was released. But that's what we're in the midst of. So that's why I call for white people. We need to establish a new nation somewhere here in North America. The blacks, you can never do enough for them. So I would say to them, you need to have your nation too, where you can live happier ever after. You're not going to have to be around these white devils, and you're going to have your own nation where you can have your own production. That's why I've advocated giving the entire state of New Jersey to the blacks and the entire state of South Carolina to the blacks. If you could spend $1 trillion on that war of Iraq, which is a total waste of time, you can devote $1 trillion to buy out all the white people in South Carolina and give the blacks homes, and they can all move there, and they don't have to suffer under white people anymore. That's how you put the end to the agitation. But nobody talks about racial separation and the nationhood. Well, it should be. And remember, the American white Protestants, of which one of the leaders was Francis Scott Key, with the repatriation of American freed blacks to Liberia, he was the one that oversaw the society, the colonization society here in America, that facilitated that, so that American blacks could move to Liberia, the most beautiful nation in Africa with food production around year-round, and that they could have their own country. And when they established a Protestant black nation called Liberia, they set up a constitution in Liberia where no white men could own 1 square foot of ground, as the way it should be. All this you can find in the great book, A History of Slavery and the Slave Trade by W.O. Blake. It's 1,000 pages, written in 1860. So the solution is before us. Racial separation of the nationhood. It works in the past, but the papacy hates it. And so we have to realize when we do this, our foremost arch rival will be the papacy, its Jesuits, and its secret society, and the Pope, because the last thing they want is a nation of a certain race, language, and culture with boundaries, reading the Bible and being prosperous. That's the last thing they want.
Yeah, some of the biggest institutions in academia and Ivy League universities have been pushing racial separation for some of their black graduates. So black graduates are allowed to have the right and pride to have their own graduation ceremony with no other white people or any other races around. And it's interesting because it's not the same. It's not equal for everyone else, right? No one else can perform this. Yeah,
it's an agitation against the whites. That's what it is. If those blacks would say, you know what, we want our own graduation because we're looking forward to the day when we can start our own nation here. We don't hate white people. We're not going to blame them for all of our failures. And though there's no black fathers in the family, this is why all the young sons, the vast majority, grow up to be criminals. But we're not going to blame the white people anymore. We're going to have our own nation. I hope they wish us well, and we wish them well. That's what ought to happen, but that's not what happens. It's an agitation of hatred.
Yeah, no, and also it sets up the black people in this country for this incredible, like, swan song of destruction, because they have built up the individuals. I feel bad for women in this country, who are black women. They're like, I think of some of the politicians, like the Crockett congresswoman in Texas, and these are individuals who have been damaged, and their culture and their history and their particular racial ethnicity has been just destroyed in so many ways here in America. But they come away with it.
Wait a second. They've destroyed themselves by their wickedness, by their constant fornication, by their serial adultery. They've destroyed themselves, having all these bastard children that have no fathers and therefore go out and commit crimes all the time, which is exactly what the Jesuits want. What's her name? Crockett ought to be thankful. She ought to say the same exact thing Cassius Clay said. I thank God my great-great-great-great-grandfather was a slave, because there's no world heavyweight champion without the slavery and then being brought over here, and they could then excel. The great book to read upon this is called The Hand of God in History by Hollis Reed, written in 1856. And he's a very great Bible-believing man. He took him 7 years to write a couple of his books, The Hand of God in History and The Footprints of Satan, which is a masterpiece. And he says it appears in the providence of God that the blacks were brought here, that they could be taught our ways, and then, having been educated and taught our ways, they could go to Africa and start a huge black kingdom. That's what he said. And that's exactly what the Protestants tried to do with Liberia. So the only solution is back to Africa to have their own nation with their own rich black people and their own technology. And we'll see how well they do. I wish them well. But it has to be racial separation. We're going to race war. And there's been a race war waging since the 1960s against white people. And finally, I think some white people are waking up to that. But they're going to respond in kind. And that's the problem. They need to respond, wait a second, we can't live around them anymore. We have to separate into nationhood. We don't hate them. We want to separate into nationhood. They don't need us. They're very vocal about that. They don't need the white man. Just listen to Joy Reid and Don Lemon and all those other senators. Go ahead, listen to them, and you can have your own nation, and we wish you well. But the Pope will run them. He will run those black nations through their leaders, just like he ran, just like he ran Jesse Jackson and Martin Luther King and Al Sharpton. They're all papal agitators for the Pope of Rome. And that's the great threat that the blacks will have to face if they're going to have their own nation here in North America or in Africa.
No, I agree with you. I feel terrible about the hubris that they've been in many ways instigated into it. I think that when, like we talked about before, when John F. Kennedy was shot, the kind of stability and the kind of future of the black community in their churches, in their strong marriages, in their like really strong family units, the trajectory of that was changed and was altered to have this communistic food stamp. Yeah, it destroyed, took fathers out of the home. It altered their future demographic trajectory and brought it to this place where we have.
The civil rights movement was the worst thing that could ever happen to them. And there's certain black men that used to write for the John Birch Society, and they admitted this. There's another guy he's called Manning Johnson. I have him on my website. A great black man. He wants his own nation, and the Jesuits ran him off the road and killed him. Manning Johnson. So, and he was a Bible-believing man. You never heard one profane word out of his mouth, and I have his recording on Vatican assassins. So that's what's happened, and that's what the Jesuits have done to them, and so they need to see that their leaders are traitors. When I spoke in Atlanta many years ago, there was a large black audience there, and there was a big black guy who was one of the bouncers. He was in charge of security. I said, black men, I said, you don't have any leaders. Not one. They've all betrayed you into this agitation that you're now in the midst of. And it was dead silence. Nobody's accusing me of being a racist there. And when I left the stage and I had to go back, left the stage, I had to go back under it. This great big black guy's name was Derek. He came up to me and he said, finally, somebody said it. Finally. And I said, well, you can have a copy of my CD, Vatican Assassins. He said, I'd like to have that, Eric. So a lot of blacks know what needs to be done, but they don't know what to do. I had a black couple here, and I talked to the lady, and she said, you have a very good reputation in Philadelphia with the Nation of Islam. I said, well, you know what? They consider me to be a white devil. They said, not you. I said, well, you know what? What they need to do is they need to come out and say, this is what we really want, racial separation and the nationhood, and we don't hate anybody. We don't call white people white, blonde-haired, blue-eyed white devils anymore. We just want to have our own nation. That's what needs to be done. And she said, Eric, if there were black men who were advocating that, like you said, they would be killed. I said, well, you got a point. That's what they did to Malcolm X. So we need to see who the enemy is, and it's the Roman papacy run by the Jesuits through their various secret societies. And until we deal with those criminals, everything is in vain that we're seeking to have any remedy for.
No, it's a very kind of, I don't know, the world seems very kind of schizophrenic because you have these new right operators like Steve Bannon and individuals, I think of Jack Posobiec, who are hardcore right on the extreme right, and they claim to be Roman Catholics, and they claim to be defending the nation's borders against this invasion. But then the head of their own religion is on social media excoriating anyone who would, push these people out of the country. So
that's right. And there's a big statue of the Pope on the Arizona border with his hands out, welcoming all the alien Catholic invaders. Yeah, that's right. I was over to the Jesuit novitiate when they still had it before they sold it to the Phoebe over here. And
so how do the new right papists answer that? How do they answer that their religion and the edifice of their entire dictatorship that they worship is enforcing these policies that are destroying the nation, and they're, like you said, they're ultimately agitating the population. They're ultimately pushing for this extremism, and violence is never the answer. If we could have a peaceful separation,
Yes,
and you can see
peaceful
that.
separation.
Yeah, no, these individuals, like these invaders, are now, they're on camera, they're on social media everywhere, fighting the ICE officers, fighting back. You have leftist, like Antifa fellows who will try to help these illegals escape the law enforcement.
Antifa that's paid, they're all paid agents, going back to Masonic Jew George Soros and others working for the Pope. They're all paid agents in this agitation. Why? To drive the white people to desperation after getting beaten and mugged by Antifa and beating up the photographers. It just enrages the white men. And that balloon is going to burst, and it's going to go right into the new right. And you put a uniform on these white men, you got some serious killers on your hands. And that's exactly where the Pope wants to go and his Jesuits.
So that's what the provocateurs are pushing for. It's to try to elicit and try to instigate this rage on behalf of the people here who...
Absolutely. That's what Steve Bannon's all about, that fanatical Roman Catholic. Notice he always dresses in black, like the good Jesuit that he is. Black tie, black shirt, black coat, always in black, 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 black. He's an absolute Jesuit codger, and I have to laugh at this fighting between him and Mark Levin. Mark Levin calls him a dumbass, and they go back and forth. They're both working for the Pope. Levin is another Masonic Jew. He's busy working for the Pope's Zionist labor government, the Likud government of Israel run by the Pope. So he's one extreme. Levin will never come out and say Netanyahu ordered the IDF to stand down, which was a criminal act. Neither will Ben Shapiro. Because then you have to indict Netanyahu. And the question is, who does he work for? Who gave him that order to do that? Why? The Latin Patriarch of Jerusalem. That's who did it. So none of these questions can be entertained, because when you press for the answer, it's going to go right to Rome.
No, I thought about that, how this contention, for instance, between Mark Levin and Steve Bannon, how contentious it was, and how it was like playing out on social media and in the general populace. And there's this outcry, which I'm sure you noticed, and it's kind of always been there, this underlying kind of pseudo-intellectual Jew hate that really goes on. Where, these individuals, they read a few books, and they've come to the conclusion that the world conspiracy is these despicable Jews. And so they miss out on really the power play that's happening behind the scenes at the universities and at the executive level in government, where the Jesuits are taking over. And no one will talk about it. You can see them moving and operating with impunity without anyone. And the left and the Antifa fellows are kind of all becoming like crypto Catholics right now as they kind of push the Pope to be in conflict with ICE. That's what it's about. They want to see the Pope
and the average American
contradict the government.
The average American says, all these people are in here against the law, they're criminals, and they need to be sent back. And how are you going to get them back? You got to round them up. Well, that's right. They need to be rounded up and sent back to where they came from. But now we can assault the ICE officers that are doing the right thing by rounding them up. And so that will further facilitate rage, because remember that Antifa is paid. Black Lives Matter. I call it not Black Lies. It's Black Lies. L-I-E-S. Black Lives Matter, because that's all it is lies and propaganda. And so with these agitators, then covered, but without showing their connection to Freemasonry and ultimately the Jesuits, the people are divided when they should say, wait a second, this is an agitation. We're not flat buying this. And the thing between Levin and Steve Bannon, that's all a facade and a farce. We're not going to go for that. We're not going to be divided over that. We know that they're both working for the Pope. We know Sean Hannity's working for the Pope. We know that Lawrence O'Donnell on MSNBC is working for the Pope, those Irish Catholics. They're both working from the different extremes in the Hegelian dialectic to bring us to what the Jesuits want, and that's their synthesis, which is the new right, absolutism, quasi-fascism, as Martin Lee called it in his book, The Beast Reawakens.
No, I think you're right. I see that I think that the papacy and their power structure there, their hierarchy, it seems like they must smell blood in the water to be moving forward like this, because they're giving like a religious pretense. They're expending a lot of their, political capital, for want of a better word, but they're putting a lot of energy into this, giving a pretense of holiness and Christianity, and like the poor downtrodden immigrants who are just being bullied by this tyrant Trump, and so they're playing it both ways. You can see it's obvious.
And the Pope, the lying hypocrite that he is, Pope was Leo the 14th. If he's so concerned about the poor, why doesn't he give some of the Vatican gigatrillions to them? It would be nothing for the Vatican to give them each $10,000 each, but he's not. That's something you get to pay for, boy, and further destroy the middle class of white Protestant nations. So I don't want to hear any pope talk about the downtrodden, because he's got plenty of money to give to them.
Yeah, no, this is just, him playing politics here in America. And I think that they're getting a lot of calculation. They're getting a lot of, they're making a lot of hay out of this particular situation. And I can see that they expect that. I wonder how I think that Donald Trump is moving forward in Memphis, Tennessee, and in Chicago. And right now there is a legitimate and kind of lawful reason for the federal government to be stepping in, but you can see how easily and quickly it can shift into this military government, into this martial law.
That's why they've incited all this black crime. I had a black student. He was in Chicago. He was in a gang years ago. He said, "Yeah, Eric, we used to hide our guns up in the on the roofs and the drains. Then we go out and conduct our drug trade." And he said that the government, the federal government, would bring in tractor trailer loads into the center city loaded with guns, and then they would abandon them and leave them there for all the savage blacks to get their guns and have their warfare and can commit all their crime. Those guns were provided by District of Columbia, District of Catholics, District of Colors, working for the papacy. They have incited all this black crime in the major cities. Why? Because then we have the strong man that comes in and says, we need to put an end to this. And there's a lot of blacks in those cities. We don't want this. They can't stand the governor of the mayor of Chicago, most of those blacks. They hate him. So they facilitated the justification to bring in the military in these cities. And I've seen several black men say, we need martial law here. We got all this crime. And one weekend we had 10 black men killed with each having their gang wars and so on. We need them. So they're justifying the martial law military presence. And I say, when the military presence is in Chicago and savage black Memphis, I don't know if you've been through that place recently, but it's horrible. When they're there, they're going to stay there. They're not going to leave. And hence it will be the establishment of a justified martial law due to all this crime, black crime, that they have facilitated and encouraged for the last 60, 70 years. It's a brilliant plan. Remember, the Jesuits always plan 100 years in the future for what they're doing now.
To your point, there's two other pieces of the puzzle that I noticed to make this really stand out, and that's the book Dark Alliance by Gary Webb, where he puts the finger right on basically Bill Clinton and the CIA for bringing in the cocaine crack epidemic into Compton and basically facilitating the gang war between the Bloods and the Crips. So you can see that the Blood and Crips were like a managed, almost like what the CIA would do in a foreign country to destabilize and destroy the area. And that's what they did in LA. And you can see that also the criminal culture music industry, which just only these large, rich music production agencies only pick the most violent and the most brutal and the most denigrating and degenerate rap artists to come up and to basically influence the culture with their perverted, sick kind of murder cult or whatever it is. And so, and it's so diabolical and so demonic if you take a close look at it. I have teenage sons who are finally growing up, but there's a murder cult that is around these rappers where if you the next artist to make a hit record and you're getting famous, then another like low level like hood rat was going to come up and just get famous for shooting you and killing you, and then go and making a rap album about it. Yeah, exactly. That's the pattern.
That's what he did. Some even think he killed Michael Jackson with that black Masonic doctor. But yeah,
some think he might have killed Prince. Yeah, the artist formerly known as Prince, right?
Of course.
Some drug thing gone wrong. It's yeah.
Yeah, right. With as much experience he had with drugs, he's not going to do that incorrectly. So no,
good point.
That's exactly what they do. hmm And what else did you said something? Oh, remember Gary Webb was
Right.
murdered when he came out with Dark Alliance, when he showed that the CIA was involved in Iran-Contra
Right.
and the drug running to Ricky Ross
Yeah.
in Los Angeles. And when he came out with that, he got 2 bullets to the back of the head. It's the same octopus murderers, the same group that committed the octopus murders when they killed Danny Casolaro, when they slashed when this army officer slashed his wrist a total of 8 times. And you can watch this on American Conspiracies, and then you want to go to the octopus murders. It's all about Danny Casolaro and how he was honed in on it, just like Gary Webb was. And before he could publish his book, they killed him. And one of the guys that was involved in that was Robert Booth Nichols, who was CIA and mafia. And you got to see that 4-part or 5-part series of the octopus murders. He takes it to all the big players, but he never makes the connection to the Knights of Malta and to the papacy. And that's where he failed.
Yeah, they are this organization that remains below the, and out of the mouths of all these different alternative media guys and all the different Alex Jones of the world. They will not say the word. They will not say, read the word about it. They'll talk all about all kinds of other things, but there's just kind of like a no-go there. I think that in the culture here in America, they're looked at like, they look at the Crusader Knights and this kind of, this rose-colored glasses where they see them as Christian liberators or like a force for good, and they don't see them the way I do as far as being papal knights. And ultimately, we were talking about Hadrian, and Hadrian was an individual who wore this title of Pontifex Maximus. And I like to trace that title of Pontifex Maximus through time as it goes on this unbroken chain of succession. And so it leads from ancient imperial Rome and the imperator there to the future papal Rome, who would become the imperator of, would continue to be the imperator of Rome and wear this title of Pontifex Maximus. And we're moving to this future day now where the Pontifex Maximus is really concerned with control over Jerusalem. And that's why we can tie him in as the Antichrist of Revelation and of Daniel and etc. And so without this knowledge of prophecy, I think a lot of these guys are completely just lost. They're lost in the weeds.
The final Pope of Rome is the 7th Roman Caesar in Revelation 17:10. He gets killed, Revelation 13:14, with a sword. He comes back to life. The Lord raises him from the dead, brings his spirit and soul back into his body. Satan possesses him to then be the Antichrist or the beast for 42 months. And he's the 8th Roman Caesar, yet he's one of the 7 of Revelation 17:10. Well, here's the last one. 7th Roman Caesar, killed, comes back to life to be the beast, the Antichrist for 42 months. And so that's why the reformers were right. The papacy is Antichrist. They thought the papacy was the Antichrist, and that was a mistake of John Wycliffe, who came out with that doctrine that the papacy was the Antichrist, when the Bible's clear that it's a man. He has the number of a man, Revelation 13:18.
Well, the papacy is a man as well, right? I mean, it is the administration of all the volition and the powers of this one man who's like this unitary ultimate imperator. But it's the command of the papacy is the command of the Pope, right? I mean, as I understand it.
The papacy is the dynasty of the Antichrist. Every Pope of Rome has been put in a place to be the Antichrist if the time was right. I have a tree that my dear brother Ed Canfield provided for me. So he worked for the police. He was a deputy in Maryland. And he found this chart going all the way from Peter all the way to the top to, I think, Leo the 13th and different branches of this tree. Because every pope is an Antichrist, and the final Pope of Rome, which has an equilateral triangle on the top with IHS in the middle, is going to be the Jesuit creation of the Antichrist, the final Pope. And I have the chart. My friend Jason Cooley's going to publish this and put it up on his website.
When you said one day that it could be that the Jesuit symbol there with the 36 rays of light, which is ultimately like a throwback to like sun worship, and to that ultimately could become the mark of the beast. And I was thinking about that, and I just thought how profound that was, and also
just remember, each one of those points the male, the female, the male, the female. There's 32 points on the outside of the circle, and there's 4 points on the inside. 3 points on the bottom of IHS and a point on top over the H. So that's 36 points. And when you add that, 1 point plus the second point is 2. That makes 3. The third makes 6. The fourth makes 10. When you add that all together like that,
it's 666. Yeah, that's the number of the beast.
That's exactly right. Mm-hmm. So the Jesuits are the big promoters of 666. That's why it's on all the universal product codes.
Well, it's interesting because that particular numerology right there goes back to Babylonian numbering systems and how Babylon used to count through.
Yes, it does. The most accurate numbering system is not decimal. It's sexamal,
right,
based on 6. And this is what ancient Sumer had.
Right.
The most advanced mathematics ever. And it was the first real civilization that was discovered by Protestant archaeologists. And it was a sexamal, or based on 6, their numbering system. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that reminds me of this. When it was said that JFK was going to break the CIA into 1,000 pieces, and later on he was murdered. And it seems likely now that when we do the investigation that George Bush Sr., the first President Bush, was probably at the location when JFK was murdered. And later he would have a speech where he would talk about 1,000 points of light. And I thought about that symbol, the Illuminati, the kind of Jesuit Illuminati starburst symbol,
Yeah. George Herbert Walker Bush, tied to the order through his father, and also to the Walkers, because George Herbert Walker went to Stonyhurst in England, run by the Jesuits. So you have George Herbert Walker Bush's skull and bones, and he was there in Dallas at Dealey Plaza at the time of the Kennedy assassination. Have his picture there. Right. He's standing there. So there's no doubt he was involved in that, and also the cover-up. And that's why my dear friend, my late friend, Joel Boehnerman, who was an unsaved Jew living in Israel, I went to visit him once, and he gave me the book, Crimes of a President. And he wrote Crimes of a President to show all the terrible things that George Herbert Walker Bush did. And for that book, he was poisoned by Victor Marchetti, who was the deputy director of the CIA, and Marchetti, that Italian Roman Catholic, gave him a poison tie. But when Joel put on the tie, he developed throat cancer. He later got over it, but that's what he told me, how he got his throat cancer. So they're serious about getting rid of any real authors to expose their game.
Well, that was a really fast hour. Pastor Phelps, I want to thank you again for coming back. And where can our listeners keep up with you? I know you have your website, VaticanAssassins.org, and also you have 24/7 World Radio. And I don't get to listen. I listen to your podcast, broadcasts, but I don't get to listen to as many of the other ones as I would like. But there's a lot of information there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you can go to 24/7 World Radio, click on archive shows. EJP Hour 1, Hour 2 will come up with some others. Just click on Hour 2, and that's where all my recent podcasts are on the Charlie Kirk matter and other matters too. But I kind of left them up there. You can order my broadcast for the last 11 years. I have it on my website if you're interested. And I have some other things there that might be of interest. But like always, you can use support. It's the ministry of a church. I don't have any prices, no charge taxes. And if you can send a gift to my Cash App at Eric, E-R-I-C, John, J-O-N, Phelps, P-H-E-L-P-S, I'd appreciate it. Or you can send a check to RBT, P.O. Box 306, Newmanstown, Pennsylvania, 17073. Or you can give through PayPal at RBPB, donate, or RBPB, donate at Comcast.net. So any one of those three would be very helpful. You can send a check. RBT, P.O. Box 306, Newmanstown, Pennsylvania, 17073. So,
okay.
Any amount is appreciated because this is the apex of power. And the more young men and women that hone in on this, the more delightful it is for me to see this. Because I'll be 72 in 2 months. Don't know how much longer I have. But I would love to see a whole bunch of young men and women fasten on to this great Jesuit conspiracy, how it's ruined our country and used us as the agents to impose the Pope's temporal power around the world, financially and militarily. So
No, as I've
Anyway,
listened to you, as I've listened to you over the years, I've heard your message be a message of peace and of the gospel, and also ultimately of nonviolence. And so you seem to be a watchman on the wall who is trying to make people aware of the dangers of what happens if we're radicalized, if we're brought into this kind of racial war, and we're brought into this civil conflict here in the United States. And we have to, with wisdom and with this kind of knowledge that that you've been bringing forth, it makes it easier for people to understand the machinations behind the scenes, and why that they don't need to be brought into this rage that they're trying to incite.
And you know what? Kevin Annett has done some pretty good work. He's just, with his Court of International Justice, or whatever he calls it, he's got a conviction of Trump and the Pope and Netanyahu and a host of other, Charles III and the others. He's got them all convicted, and it's enjoyable to listen to what he had to say. But he doesn't know the Lord. He's not saved. He's not calling for people to truly repent and believe the gospel that Christ died for your sins and buried and rose again. But he has the right attitude of exposing it, and he also wants to create his own new nation called Canetta, I think. But
well, we should pray for him that the Lord will visit him and he will see that truth there, because that is the ultimate thing that would empower him. So
that's exactly right. Amen.
All right. Well, you have a great night, Eric. We'll let you get back to it, and thank you again.
My pleasure, Sean. Lord bless and your listeners.
ForgottenBooks.com. Guys, you guys have to check out ForgottenBooks.com. It's just a really wonderful outlet. Forgotten Books is a London-based book publisher specializing in the restoration of old books, both fiction and nonfiction manuscripts that are hard to find, almost forgotten and lost to modernity, right? So we have some really incredible books here on ForgottenBooks.com. And as we look through, I'm just looking through some of the headlines here, and it's incredible. Like I can see here that a lot of Helena Petrovna Blavatsky's books are here. So I could see studies by Malachi Taylor on Ephesians. Fascinating. I can see here an essay on church government by an unknown author, right? As I go through here, over 1.3 million forgotten or lost or all but lost books, right? A history of the so-called Jansenist Church of Holland, the moral concordances of St. Anthony of Padua, right? All this incredible books, guys. All these incredible forgotten books. A sermon on the death of Abraham Lincoln, right? This is incredible. This is an incredible resource. The secret instructions of the Jesuits, right? All these. ISIS Unveiled. Wow, this is incredible. ISIS Unveiled right here on ForgottenBooks.com. Guys, you got to come check it out.